May I read you a Christmas story? 5-year-old Madeline climbed onto her father's lap. Did you get enough to eat, he asked her. She smiled and patted her tummy. I can't eat anymore. Did you have some of Grandma's pie? A whole piece. Joel looked across the table at his mom. Looks like you filled us up. Don't think we'll be able to do anything tonight but go to bed. Madeline put her little hands on either side of his big face. Oh, but Papa, this is Christmas Eve. You said we could dance. Joel feigned a poor memory. Did I now? Why, I don't remember saying anything about dancing. Grandma smiled and shook her head as she began clearing the table. But Papa, Madeline pleaded, we always dance on Christmas Eve. Just you and me, remember? A smile burst from beneath his big mustache. Of course I remember, darling. How could I forget? And with that, he stood and took her hand in his, and for a moment, just a moment, his wife was alive again, and the two were walking into the den to spend another night before Christmas as they had spent so many, dancing away the evening. They would have danced the rest of their lives, but then came the surprise pregnancy and the complications. Madeline arrived, but her mother did not, and Joe, the thick-handed butcher from Minnesota, was left to raise his Madeline alone. Come on, Papa, she tugged on his hand. Let's dance before everyone arrives. She was right. Soon the doorbell would ring, and the relatives would fill the floor, and the night would be past, but for now it was just Papa and Madeline. Rebellion flew into Joe's world like a Minnesota blizzard. About the time she was old enough to drive, Madeline decided she was old enough to lead her life, and that life did not include her father. I should have seen it coming, Joe would have said, but for the life of me, I didn't. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to handle her pierced nose and the tight shirts. He didn't understand the late nights and the poor grades, and most of all, he didn't know when to speak and when to be quiet. She, on the other hand, had it all figured out. She knew when to speak to her father, never. She knew when to be quiet, always. The pattern was reversed, however, with a lanky tattooed kid from down the street. He was no good, and Joe knew it. And there was no way he was going to allow his daughter to spend Christmas Eve with that kid. You'll be with us tonight, young lady. You'll be at your grandma's home eating your grandma's pie. You'll be with us at Christmas Eve. Though they were at the same table, they might as well have been on different sides of town. Madeline played with their food and said nothing. Grandma tried to talk to Joe, but he was in no mood to talk. Part of him was angry. Part of him was heartbroken. And the rest of him would have given anything to know how to talk to this girl who used to sit on his lap. Soon the relatives arrived, bringing with them a welcome end to the awkward silence. As the room filled with noise and people, Joe stayed on one side, Madeline sullenly on the other. Put on the music, Joe reminded one of his brothers, and so he did. Thinking he would be honored, he turned and walked toward his daughter. Will you dance with your papa tonight? The way she huffed and turned, you'd think he'd have insulted her. In full view of the family, she walked out the front door and marched down the sidewalk, leaving her father alone, very alone. Madeline came back that night, but not for long. Joe never faulted her for leaving. After all, what's it like being the daughter of a butcher? In their last days together, he tried so hard, he made her favorite dinner she didn't want to eat. He invited her to a movie. She stayed in her room. He bought her a new dress. She didn't even say thank you. And then there was that spring day he left work early to be at the house when she arrived home from school. Wouldn't you know, that was the day she never came home. A friend saw her and her boyfriend in the vicinity of the bus station. The authorities confirmed the purchase of a ticket to Chicago. Where they went from there was anybody's guess. The scrawny boy with the tattoos had a cousin. The cousin worked a night shift at a convenience store south of Houston. For a few bucks a month, he would let the runaways stay in his apartment at night, but they had to be out during the day, which was fine with them. They had big plans. He was going to be a mechanic, and Madeline just knew she could get a job at a department store. Of course, he knew nothing about cars, and she knew even less about getting a job, but you don't think of things like that when you're intoxicated on freedom. After a couple of months, the cousin changed his mind, and the day he announced his decision, the boyfriend announced his. Madeline found herself facing the night with no place to sleep and no hand to hold. It was the first of many such nights. A woman in the park said that there's a homeless shelter near the bridge. For a couple bucks, she could get a bowl of soup and a cot. A couple bucks is about all she had. She used her backpack as a pillow and a jacket as a blanket. The room was so rowdy it was hard to sleep. Madeline turned her face to the wall and for the first time in several days thought of the whiskered face of her father as he would kiss her goodnight. But as her eyes began to water, she refused to cry. She pushed the memory deep inside and determined not to think about home. She'd gone too far to go back. The next morning, the girl in the cot beside her showed her a fistful of tips she'd made from dancing on tables. This is the last night I'll have to stay here, she said. Now I can pay for my own place. They told me they're looking for another girl. You should come by. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a card. Here's the address. Madeline's stomach turned at the thought. All she could do was mumble, I'll think about it. She spent the rest of the week on the streets looking for work. At the end of the week, when it was time to pay her bill at the shelter, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the card. It was all she had left. I won't be staying tonight, she said, and walked out the door. Hunger as a way of softening convictions. If Madeline knew anything, she knew how to dance. Her father had taught her. Now men the age of her father watched her. She didn't rationalize it. She just didn't think about it. Madeline simply did her work and took their dollars. She might have never thought about it except for the letters. The cousin brought them, not one or two, but a box full, all addressed to her, all from her father. Your boyfriend must have squealed on you. These come 2 or 3 a week, complained the cousin. Give him your address. Oh, but she couldn't do that. He might find her. Nor could she bear to open the envelopes. She knew what they said. He wanted her home. But if he knew what she was doing, he would not be writing. It seemed less painful not to read them. So she didn't. Not that week nor the next week when he brought more. Nor the next when he came again. She kept them in the dressing room, at the club, organized according to the postmark. She ran her finger across the top of each, but couldn't bring herself to open one. Most days Madeline was able to numb the emotions. Thoughts of home and thoughts of shame were shoved into the same part of her heart. But there were occasions when she had thoughts were too strong to resist. Like the time she saw a dress in the clothing store window, a dress the same color as her father had purchased for her, a dress that had been far too plain for her. With much reluctance, she had put it on, stood with him before the mirror. "My, you look as tall as I am," he had said to her. She stiffened at his touch. Seeing her weary face reflected in the store window, Madeline realized she'd give 1,000 dresses to feel his arm again. She left the store and resolved not to pass it again. In time, leaves fell, the air chilled, the mail came, and the cousin complained, and the stack of letters grew. Still, she refused to send him her address, and she refused to read a letter. Then a few days before Christmas Eve, another letter arrived. Same shape, same color, but this one had no postmark. And it was not delivered by the cousin. It was sitting on her dressing room table. A couple days ago, a big man stopped by and asked me to give you this, explained one of the dancers. Said you'd understand the message. He was here, she asked anxiously. The woman shrugged. Suppose he had to be. Madeline swallowed hard and looked at the envelope. She opened it and removed the card. I know where you are, it read. I know what you do. This doesn't change the way I feel, or what I've said in the letter is still true. But I don't know what you said, Madeline declared. She pulled a letter from the top of the stack and read it. Then a second, a third. Each letter had the same sentence. Each sentence asked the same question. In a matter of moments, the floor was littered with paper and her face was streaked with tears. Within an hour, she was on a bus. I just might make it in time. She barely did. The relatives were starting to leave. Joe was helping Grandma in the kitchen when the brother called from the suddenly quiet den. Joe! Someone's here to see you. Joe stepped out of the kitchen and stopped. In one hand, the girl held a backpack, and in the other hand, a card. Joe saw the question in her eyes. The answer is yes, she said to her father. If the invitation is still good, the answer is yes. Joe swallowed hard. Oh my. The invitation is good. And so the two danced again on Christmas Eve. On the floor, near the door, rested a letter with Madeline's name and her father's request, "Will you come home and dance with your papa again?" Your Heavenly Papa is saying the same thing to you. Will